Okay, part 2 of The Art of War, the Manosphere. Now, the Manosphere has been, or actually been around for quite a while. It has gone through multiple stages. It really has only been an active thing that I can specifically recall for probably just a little over 30 years. Needless to say, there's a lot of catching up to do. There's been a lot of progress made in the last in 3 decades. They've probably covered more ground in 30 years than what feminists have done in like 60 or 70. This is going to be a long-term thing. And because it's going to be a long-term thing, this is going, some of the things that I'm going to be talking about in part 3 are going to be a little bit frustrating to some men, especially men that have been around for decades and decades and decades. And I've tried, like, guys like Warren Farrell and Jack. I can't remember his name at this point in time. I think his first name is Jack. But there's a few of them around that have been around for a very, very long time. The Manosphere has got strengths and weaknesses just like any other organization, just like any other group. I'll stop short of calling it an outright organization because it's not an organization. It's not really, it can't really be called the Red Pill movement because, again, right, there is an individualism to men that is the same yet different to how women have organized themselves. And the Manosphere, contrary to popular belief, is not the flip side of feminism, although, again, feminists control over the gynocentric world order has attempted to pull what's called, otherwise known as the middle ground fallacy, which suggests that the Manosphere is just the flip side of feminism, which when you've been in the Manosphere for as long as I've been in the Manosphere, I can tell you that it is not the flip side of feminism. Although there has definitely been attempts by the media and the establishment in an attempt to create that way, if for any other reason, an attempt to control the narrative, which, by the way, is a really big deal with feminism, that they do control the narrative and the lines of communication and the impression. That's what it really boils down to. But again, right, the Manosphere has got strengths and weaknesses just like feminism has. But in order to deal with what is potentially going to be coming up down the road, it is necessary to genuflect or reflect or take inventory as much on the Manosphere as it is on feminism. Because, again, to know yourself and to know the capabilities of yourself and to know the capability, for instance, right? Knowing the capabilities of feminism, knowing that feminism is fat, lazy, and arrogant, and the overwhelming majority that they rely on external support to get things done, and that they're not able to do anything without that external support is really critical. Knowing that there's a complete lack of accountability with the overwhelming majority of Western women is a really good thing to know. I mean, knowing that because they're so fat and lazy and arrogant that they will just say whatever they have to say and that they know that they're not going to be held to accountability is a good thing to know, right? Knowing that directly challenging feminism is going to cause women feminists to play the victim card, which is exactly what they're doing with Whatever and Fresh and Fit, Because again, right, the moment knowing that, I mean, their rhetoric and their propaganda doesn't hold up to scrutiny, it's all well and good to know this stuff. But what capabilities does the Manosphere have? What are the strengths of the Manosphere? What are the weaknesses of the Manosphere? You have to know that as well as you, for instance, right? And this is something that I'm going to have to say over and over and over again. Direct confrontation with women in feminism is going to cause them to play the victim card, right? And again, refer to some of the female propaganda that you're seeing around Fresh and Fit and whatever, and how effective those two shows have been in deconstructing feminism, and how desperate feminists are now to get those two shows off of YouTube. Like, that's actually going to make a difference. That they have to rely on censorship, and they're going to try to increasingly rely on censorship because they have no other alternative. Okay? But what can the Manosphere do? What can the Manosphere not do? What are our capabilities? What are our resources? What are we up against? What type of responses can we get? What type of things can we do? Can we go on the attack? Do we have to counterpunch? Do we just simply have to continue to build and maintain what we've got and just wait for them to make a mistake? What do we have to do? Well, we'll have more of a grasp of what we have to do if we actually look at where the Manosphere, where we're at, as opposed to what feminism is and isn't doing, right? Like, there's four squares in this, right? In order to make a correct course of action in this, in order to get the best result. Now, I've done the work, and I mean, I will be, and this, to be straight up with you as I'm going through this, one of the things that I had to realize is that this is going to require patience. This is going to require simply a lot of it's just going to be simply stand, point, build up, facilitate communication, whatnot. The Manosphere has covered a lot of ground, and they're going to especially be covering a lot of ground in the next 3 to 5 years. That being said, and there's not really going to be an organized, just like feminism, there's not really going to be a quote-unquote organized spokesperson. I mean, they're trying to make Andrew Tate that person, but Andrew Tate is not that person. In fact, Andrew Tate isn't even really the biggest content creator in the Manosphere. He's just the most well-known name inside of it. So, with that being said, let's just get into the obvious ones. And I'm going to start out with number one. And this one is really obvious for anybody that's been in the Manosphere for a long time. Unlike feminism, our arguments are factual and true. Yeah, they are. Right? That's the reason why when we're dealing with feminists, they want to make it about the personalities. They want to take stuff out of context. They want to mock the process as opposed to address the actual issues. Because if they, and like I said, the few times up until the point of Fresh and Fit and whatever, there hadn't really been any attempts to do this. The feminists that have attempted to go on these shows and deconstruct, which by the way included guys like Destiny, that have tried to go on and deconstruct that argument, relied on having to twist the facts, trying to make 2 + 2 = 5, basically doing anything other than actually address the point, right? Because if feminists have to address the point, you know, their arguments start to fall apart, right? It's hard to make 2 + 2 = 5 when you have two objects in one hand and two objects in another hand, and you flop them down right in front of them, and you can clearly see that there's four objects there, right? You know, the arguments are simple and straightforward. You don't have to get into word salad unless they require some specific details, right? Like, you know, you don't have to really, like, for instance, the issues around Andrew Tate, for instance, right? I mean, I've seen the videos of the women that he was allegedly holding, the thing that he was being criminally charged for. I've seen the videos, both of them, by the way, of the women that were being allegedly held against their will. And I mean, in both cases, the women that were being, the two that came out at 2023, and the ones that were ones about a year or so earlier, you know, like, both cases, you can clearly see the women being held against their will, freely leaving the mansion and then coming back in. And in both cases, they left with money. In the case of those two girls, they came back from a shopping trip, and they clearly had the money. If they had the money to go shopping, they probably had the money to potentially get on a bus or go to the police station. But they didn't do that, right? And that's what I'm talking about, right? They don't want to talk about that stuff, right? They want to talk about the fact that Andrew Tate and allegedly, well, not allegedly, slept with a 15-year-old in a country where the age of consent is 15. That's what they want to talk about. They want to talk about things he said. They don't actually want to talk about the case, because they actually want to talk about the case. Then their whole argument falls apart. Then all they've got is rhetoric. Then, of course, they have to throw out the accusation that you're an Andrew Tate fanboy or that you're a pedophile supporter or anything other than actually talking about what the actual case is. And I'm bringing up Tate to make a point here, right? The truth has a way of winning out. The truth, and that's the reason why they don't want to talk about those issues. Because if they were to try to talk about those issues, they wouldn't, like, their whole arguments, their arguments disintegrate, because all they have is rhetoric, propaganda, and lies. Meanwhile, you know, my truth, the truths of the Manosphere, any involvement with a woman gives that woman a metaphorical gun. You know, oh, well, you're being paranoid. Well, that's, you know, that doesn't actually address the point, right? That doesn't address the point, right? Like, is what I'm saying untrue? You know, you can say you feel sorry for me. You can say who hurt you or whatever. And I mean, that's not actually addressing the point, right? You know? So, I mean, yeah, they don't talk about the points, because if they actually started talking about the actual points and the actual issues, they would get absolutely massacred. And that's not what they want to do. The arguments being put forth, the men's issues being put forth by the Manosphere, hold up to scrutiny because they're true, which is why feminists don't want to talk about the issues, because if they start talking about the issues, that's when they're finished, right? So yeah, that's number one. You're right. Like, I mean, I could say that any and it's like, yeah, we all being paranoid. It doesn't matter, man. What I'm saying is true, right? A man receives a much longer and stiffer sentence for the same crime than a woman does. Women who commit sexual assault, teachers who sexually assault their students, female teachers, get lesser sentences than if a man does it. In fact, quite the opposite. In fact, in some cases, when a boy is sexually assaulted by his teacher, the boy is actually considered lucky, whereas the girl is considered the victim of a predator, right? Like if a woman waits until a guy becomes of legal age and then does him, it's like, that guy had discipline. He waited to get that one. Wait till he was out of school. You know what? I can't remember the name of the actual porn performer, but she literally waited until she was 18 and out of high school to sleep with this one teacher. And then when it didn't go the way she wanted, she reported him for grooming, and he lost his fucking job anyway. I could go on and on and on and on, right? This stuff holds up, and you know what? The truth will out. That's ultimately it. And they can scream as loud as they want. It doesn't make anything less true. Number 2, male nature thrives on conflict and competition. Yeah, that's true. That's the reason. I said this earlier, right? You take 100, you set up a gladiator arena, you take 100 guys from the Manosphere and 100 male feminists, and you have them all fight to the death, right? The Manosphere guys are going to win out, like, literally almost every single time. Like, without a doubt. And the reason why is that male nature, male sacrifice, male commitment requires them, because generally speaking, there's no external support coming in to help them out, right? Means that men occasionally have to get ugly. Men have to do the ugly thing. Men have to go out and do the ugly work. Men have to do the things that, men have to make the sacrifices. They do, right? And because men have to go out and actually do these things, the men that do these things are harder, fitter, more committed, just overall much more suited to the task than a male feminist, and definitely much more suited to a task than a woman is, especially when it comes to hard labor and war and combat, right? That's just a fact, right? And I'm not just talking about that. I'm talking about commitment to, say, what's going on in the Manosphere, right? Like, you've got veterans like me that have been around, like, going on 13 years here. And there's been guys that have been around for 20 and 25 and 30 years that are still fighting the fight, and that have been in the trenches for a very long time and know how women operate, know how feminists operate, know their tactics, right? And you know what? Basic male nature, competitive nature, conflict, tribalism, that particular type of situation, and specifically with the men in the Manosphere, just simply makes them more capable of fighting the fight. If it gets down to it, if it gets ugly, are there going to be male feminists that are going to go get through the crucible and become decent fighters? Yeah, but they're going to be very few and far between. Most of them are going to fold up like bad tents. Yeah, and that's basically it. Strength number 3, male nature is conductive to conflict and competitiveness. Right? We're willing to fight, and we're willing to keep the fight going, right? Because our cause is true and just and justified, as opposed to, say, male feminists or feminists in general, who are basically attempting to keep a lie going. Now, again, right? You go back to that scene in The Matrix where you have There will be individuals that will literally fight to the death to keep this thing going, to keep the illusion up. There's going to be male feminists that are going to be like that. They will literally fight, and there's going to be feminists that are going to fight literally to the bitter end. Knowing that you're dealing with those individuals are going to be very rare. They're going to be very few and far between. They're going to be relatively, there's not going to be that many of them. Now, is it possible that you might get an individual who is and I talked about this before, is it possible that you might get a male feminist or a female who might be the equivalent of a Rommel or an Alexander? Yeah. And for a while, that individual might possibly be able to organize well enough to delay the inevitable. But here's the thing, right? In the end, a Alexander or a Rommel or a Patton is going to emerge on our side. And it's gonna be a standoff. And by the way, given what male nature is like, there's probably going to be more likely that there's going to be one on our side than there's going to be there. So in the end, even if they do manage to get somebody on their side that is able to conduct this conflict out in a way that's going to make it conducive and to maybe score some victories for feminism, which, by the way, I don't think is going to happen, but it is humanly possible, right? What you're going to do is there's going to be a guy like me who's going to figure this out and is going to develop a strategy to counter what it is. And by the way, there was one woman at one point during Gamergate who actually did come up with a strategy to counter the Gamergaters. Unfortunately, or fortunately for us, she only appeared near the end of Gamergate and not at the start. So by the time she was able to get going, most of what was happening during Gamergate was over. So yeah, there are individuals out there that right. But yeah, no, it's just not really gonna. It's just, it's gonna there's going to be more men that are gonna figure this out than women. And that brings us up to number 4, and I was talking about this earlier. We have, as men, we are just physically stronger and larger than we have the ability to control much greater ability to control our physical environment than women do. That's just a fact, right? And again, right, you take a group of men and you subject them to sustained conflict, which is what some peak guys like me and Rollo Tomasi and a few guys that have been in the Manosphere for a decade plus have been. And we've been in the trenches for a while now. We know all the tactics. And it's like we've been, even if we're not necessarily physically in the best shape, mentally and emotionally, we are like knives. We're weapons of war, right? We're ready to go, right? We know the topics, we know the conversation, we know the rhetoric, we know how feminists are going to work, we know how male feminists are going to work, we know exactly how it's going to go down, right? If it ever comes down to a straight up physical confrontation, males have much more control over their external environment. So yeah, it's going to make it a lot easier to create male spaces. If it gets down to it, it's going to be a lot easier for men to just simply create their own spaces. That's just a simple, straight up fact. Number 5. This one is, again, this is the yin to the yang of the theme of feminists. Yeah, women have institutional power. They have institutional privilege. They got the ability to say what they want, when they want, how they want, and not have it challenged. The flip side of that, though, and I've said, and I also mentioned this on the Yang side, that lack of accountability has made them fat, lazy, and stupid. Now, on the Manosphere side, we've had to stay sharp and focused and razor sharp and ready to go at the drop of a hat. We've been needing to get in there. And when a feminist comes up with a big, huge, massive pile of bullshit, like, say, what Mooncat did when she tried to claim that she debunked the entire Manosphere or whatever, we have a counter. We have people at the ready that are able to respond to whatever lies get thrown out there and can do it effectively without having to rely on rhetoric, without having to rely on propaganda. All they got to do is just stand and point and say, that's not true. This is what actually the case is. And this person didn't even do their research properly. And they don't do their research properly like the overwhelming amount of time. They don't. And when they do, they twist it around. So it's like, that there are fewer of us, but we are harder to pin down. We have a lot more flexibility, and we all, again, right, the sword of truth is on our side, right? And because the sword of truth is on our side, right, that makes our arguments valid, right? And of course, they don't have an argument. They have to rely on ad hominem. They have to rely on lies. They have to rely on deflection, minimization, all sorts of things. Anything other than addressing the point, because if they have to address the point, they're done. Right? Lack of numbers also makes it a lot easier to do hit and run attacks. However, hit and run attacks are not really going to have to be part of the male strategy. I don't really think that's going to work very hard. It's going to work very well, not hard, well, for men in general. But again, right, there's a degree of flexibility there that feminism doesn't have. And that's what lack of numbers does. The next part on this one is really interesting. It's becoming trendier to be part of the Manosphere. That's part of the reason why you're seeing a lot of feminists panicking, because they know that they're losing the battle. They know they're definitely losing the battle with the young girls, which is, by the way, one of the reasons why they have been dead quiet about transgenders having access to kids. Right? Because indirectly they benefit from this, because it sows confusion in young boys. So yeah, they know that there's an entire generation, and of course, right? It's like, you see, if you're a young boy and you're seeing this stuff, and you have. And by the way, Agent Orange exposed this way back, I think it was 2011, 2012, or it was like Pamela O'Shaughnessy was the one, it was the thing that came up. But there was an actual preschool teacher that Agent Orange exposed way back. It feels like the Stone Ages now, but I think it was 2012 that this happened. And one of the women was a preschool teacher, and in her remarks, like, she was like literally calling the young boys in her preschool, she was calling them future rapists, right? You're growing up around this, and your elementary school teachers are openly misandric, and there's no male influence, and you go to high school, it's the same thing, and you have society, and it's like, around the ages of, say, about 7 to 10, or at 12 at the oldest, like, any boy that's got a head on his shoulders is starting to notice that something doesn't add up. Right? And even though they don't necessarily have the skills to figure out that something doesn't add up, they just, it's like that sliver in your mind. Again, from the Matrix movie, which, by the way, is one of the reasons why the Matrix movie is so popular inside the Manosphere, because there's so much references in, there's a lot of references from the Matrix that apply to the Manosphere. And that's another one, a sliver, and there's that sliver in the mind of preteen and boys in their early teens, and they're seeing this happen, and they're seeing how the girls are acting around them and how the girls are able to get away with this stuff, and they're noticing there's something wrong. And along the way, you know, one of their friends or one of their older brothers or one of their older friends, or maybe they run into a guy that's from the Manosphere, and this guy tells them what's going on, right? So the boys are going to figure this out on their own. And when they figure it out, you know, they're going to jump in wholeheartedly into the Manosphere because they already knew that there was something wrong in the first place. So, yeah, the Manosphere is becoming trendy. That has a yin and a yang, and I will get into the yang when I get into the weaknesses of the Manosphere. But again, right, that is an issue. And again, ultimately what it comes down to when it comes to the strengths of the Manosphere is that you have a core group of men that is willing to take the time to spread the message, and they really, all we gotta do is just stand and point and just keep saying the same thing over and over again. And they could say whatever they want to about the messenger, right? If they're not willing to deal with the message, and they're not, then it's not going to get them anywhere. And every time they lie, they just get weaker. And every time we say what we got to say, it just gets better. And last but not least, the nature of men in groups. Men will organize themselves into groups a lot more effectively than women will. That's all. I mean, there was that whole situation on Survivor Island that really kind of brought that point home at one point. You know, like each of the men figures out what their strengths are and will just simply go to it. And they will just, a natural order of things, a natural pecking order will just emerge on its own. There's no bickering about who's in fucking charge or what personality is this and whatever, because that's just not the way how men work, right? Because men, the nature of men allows for individualism. They are much less susceptible to groupthink. That's not to say that men, and because I quite clearly have seen it, in fact, I see it every day on social media, are a lot less subjective to groupthink than women are. And the very nature of what men have to deal with and what they have to go through makes it conductive and in their best interest to be individualistic. So, yeah, harder, smarter, physically stronger, with truth on our side. Now, we don't, again, now there's certain things that we aren't able to do yet. But I mean, those are some pretty potent weapons. Those are some pretty potent abilities. Those are some pretty potent strengths there, right? The ability to commit to something long term and be willing to get ugly to get it done. You know, like they want to throw Tate in jail, for instance. And again, I don't mean to keep bringing up Tate, but it's a name that that people even outside the Manosphere know. Tate has been willing to grind it out, regardless of what you might think of Andrew Tate. But Rollo Tomasi, I have lost... Oh, God, let me think. I have had between Facebook, Reddit, and YouTube, I have lost... I think I've lost 17 accounts. You know, I'm still here, right? Like, you know, the message doesn't go away, right? The message stays consistent, and the message is true. The sword of truth, the truth will out. Now, those are some pretty potent good points, but now we have to look at the other side of this, which are the actual weaknesses of the Manosphere, and you have to take those into account as well. All right? So, yeah, now I'm going to have to be critical of the Manosphere because, again, right, unlike women, men have much less problem taking accountability for their actions. In fact, men have to take accountability for their actions. Keep in mind, there's not a lot of them, just like there's not a lot of strengths either, right? But number one on top of the list is almost a complete lack of institutional support. Yeah, most people, feminists are just able to say whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want. When we do get contacted, our points are deliberately taken out of context. Our arguments are taken out of context, and yes, if you can hear that, it is raining outside the car right now. If just in case you're wondering, the stuff gets taken out of context, happily and willingly. By the way, we don't get asked very often. Like, we don't have the same institutional support that feminism does. Now, keep in mind, because our message is true, and because we do have lawyers there are lawyers out there that are familiar with case law and know how to do their jobs, this is gradually changing. The Duluth model is eventually going to get removed, right? Medical funding is going to become more balanced. Criminal sentences, they're going to start holding women that assault the students in there, they're going to start holding them to a higher, same standard. All of this stuff is eventually going to happen, right? No matter how much smoke they blow, right? It's just simply delaying the inevitable. But again, at this point, right, like, we have to rely on the alt media to get stuff done for us. Number two, male sexual need and competitiveness will always guarantee that some men will oppose this. Yes, there's never going to be a lack of males who will sacrifice their dignity, their morality, their integrity for female approval or to get laid. There's never going to be a lack of men who will do that, right? There's never going to be a shortage of mercenary males that will quite happily throw other men under the bus to give themselves an advantage. That's just the nature of male competitiveness. You're just going to get the stupid, the weak, the unwilling, the lazy, or just the corrupt, or the psychopaths that will quite happily take the money of other men and will simply throw them under the bus and give them the wrong message. That's the bottom line, is that you're never going to get, you're never going to get full male universal support. You might be able to get full female universal support, And of course, they'll bicker and fight and argue all the time, and they'll never get anything done. But you might get at least the appearance, but I mean, you will never get full male support. That is just never going to happen, right? The male species I've seen multiple different. There's a if I find it, I'm going to have to use it. There's a graphic that I saw at one point that described all of the male mating strategies out there. And, men are adaptive. Male nature is very adaptive. So some men will do that. And so you will never get full male support. Number 3, the president of male assholes will always enable feminism. Yeah, that's the thing, right? There's still a lot of bad men out there. There's still a lot of men who will, psychopaths, just assholes, whatever, that will enable women to remain the victim, right? That will enable women to take the actions of this particular individual and project it out to, say, the entire manosphere, right? Again, it's a different form of lack of cohesion than what women have, but it is still there. So, yeah, even when things start turning around, they will still be bringing this up. They'll still try to project about the fact that they're throwing acid in women's face in the Middle East and try to project that out to equate to men doing that in the West. Or they will still talk about honor killings, even though they have. I don't think there's. I can't in modern times. I can't remember a single honor killing taking place in the West where it wasn't actually involving women from these countries that got honor killed here, that had a connection to back there, right? So there's always going to be that aspect of maleness. You're going to just have the destructive, semi-sociopathic asshole out there that will give other men a bad name. And we're just going to have to deal with that and make sure that those individuals do not end up being the ones that call the shots, and that we don't end up going the way of feminism. And number 4, and this is the one that, you've heard me talk about the victim card, but this is a big one for us. And again, Fresh and Fit and the Whatever podcast are prime examples of this. And you do see the victim card being played out when feminists attack those 2 programs on YouTube. The use of the victim card prevents the Manosphere from directly challenging feminism, right? Because they will immediately try to play the victim, and there will always be other males around, and currently institutions around that will make sure that the women are not held accountable for their actions. In fact, in a lot of cases, they will be rewarded for their actions, and that is probably one of the reasons why, when I get into the actual strategies of what we need to do, that you have to take the patient and the long view on this. Because, a lot of this is just simply building up our side and just simply allowing them to self-destruct. I think a lot of what is going on is going to end up working its way down to that particular issue. So now, then, those are the strengths and the weaknesses. Now that we know that internal divisions and men willing to sell themselves out and willing to sacrifice their dignity and choose to willfully and totally ignore facts thrown right in their faces in order to gain a procreative advantage are there. Now that we know that, what is our strategy going forward? Well, the immediate strategy, the one that I think needs to be brought up right now is, well, phase one is to just keep making content and to just keep spreading the message. Create more male spaces and just keep pumping out the rhetoric. Just keep pumping. That was propaganda, our rhetoric. Our rhetoric is actually true. Just keep stating the facts over and over and over and over and over again. They can blow as much smoke as they want. Ultimately, what it comes down to, though, is that, they don't want to deal with the actual facts. They will get into ad hominem. They will do everything other than address the point, right? So the more we talk, the more we spread our message to people who are willing to listen, then we will continue to grow and get bigger. Number two, I think, is going to be cultivate contacts inside independent media. Make sure that our side of the story gets out on a regular basis. Not necessarily in the because I got to point out the alt media is slowly becoming as large as the mainstream media, right? We can the difference between the alt media and the mainstream media is that the alt media isn't nearly as reliant on commercial sponsorship to do what it needs to do. So these individuals are a lot more willing to listen to what we have to say. So, we do have to start recruiting allies, because when feminists decide to launch a full-scale attack, I suspect that it will come all at once. It's going to be, I don't know, a couple of weeks, a couple of months, but it's going to be nasty and it's going to be ugly, and there's going to be casualties, not literal. Actually, there may even be literal physical casualties, but there's going to be metaphorical casualties on both sides, right? Making sure, but here's the ironic part. In the process of attacking the Manosphere, they will just make the Manosphere more legitimate, again, because they've got rhetoric, and that's it. That's all they've got. They've got nothing but rhetoric and propaganda. We have facts. So we need to get those facts out to the alt media, and then you just let the free market decide, and the people who are actually true and honest and open-minded and intelligent are going to come to the correct decision on their own. Now, it does not to say that there's guys in the Manosphere that won't fuck it up, and that doesn't necessarily say that, there's going to be blue pill Manosphere guys and charlatans and hustlers and whatever that are going to undermine the Manosphere. And that brings me to point number 3. Male feminists, blue pill Manosphere types, while we can't necessarily stage one-on-one battles or go full offensive on feminists, male feminists, on the other hand, are free game. Targeted if we're going to go on the offensive anywhere, this is the group of guys that we need to go out on the offensive on, right? The more of these individuals that get put up, what I would like to see happen, in my mind, this is how it would work, is that when these male feminists all line up on their side of the line, and they come in and they go and they engage in this full-scale offensive against the Manosphere, what they're going to see as they're getting in there, is that every single one of these guys is already going to see the metaphorical bodies of white knights and other male feminists put up on basically being put up on pegs and being hung, metaphorically speaking, of course. So they're going to see the bodies. They're going to be psychologically affected because they're going to see the bodies strewn out before them. They will have seen all of this happen before they even get started. That's going to be a major psychological blow for them to have to deal with. It's going to be a serious psychological blow for them to deal with, especially when you consider that your average male feminist is soft, weak, and not particularly smart, and not committed to the cause the same way that we're committed to the cause, right? Because they have to stay in a level of delusion, or they're paid mercenaries or whatever. But I mean, it's like the caliber of the individual. But I mean, you get that psychological effect where you've got these, where each of these male feminists, for the most part, there've been guys that have come over and they've tried to come over before and they've been owned. Oh, and by the way, a lot of these male feminists are just going to get they're going to run away with their tails between their legs. They're going to be converted, or they're just going to get crushed underfoot and never come back again. Again, from a metaphorical standpoint. So yeah, we need male feminists up on stakes. We need the bodies put up so that, everybody can see them. The psychological effect of knowing that you're going into a battle against a group of people that have got a large body count behind them before you even get there, right? That's going to sting psychologically. That's going to have us winning the battle before the battle even gets started. In fact, a lot of them won't even try. The fourth part on this is to just continue to build male spaces, particularly for teenagers and young men. So that there's another generation coming up behind guys like me and Rollo Tomasi and some of the older guys, that there's guys coming back. There's going to be another generation that's going to be there putting the fight in to make the changes after I'm gone. Building up that space. I'm not necessarily going to say that these people are going to all completely agree with me, but yeah, it's going to be, you're going to have to build up that space. And then when you have individuals that are stupid enough to come into these spaces, they definitely got to be put up on pegs, right? Their bodies have to be put up on pegs, right? Here be dragons. Here, if you attempt to enter this space and try to cause a problem, you are going to get owned. That message has to be sent out with authority. The next issue here is, when feminists when they do make these articles and whatever, this is the other offensive tactic that I think is going to be really useful, and this one that has been done so far, is the counter punch. When a mainstream show, like for instance what CNN did a couple weeks ago. When they come out with this show, there are multiple individuals ready to come back at that person with a counterpoint. And even if they never acknowledge that counterpoint, the fact that they don't acknowledge that counterpoint, and for instance what happened with CNN when they tried to bury, CNN effectively buried that Manosphere piece because it was so bad and so badly researched and so poorly written that it didn't even require a significant amount of effort to tear it down because the person couldn't be bothered to do proper research. You know? So yeah, continue to do the counterpunching. The last thing that I think needs to be done, and this is long term, is that, you know, you need to start building up political and social capital inside the mainstream. Again, the mainstream media is currently losing validity, but it is still the most potent force out there, and you do have to. And again, right, when, for instance, when CNN comes out with this article, you come out with a bunch of counterpieces. Yeah, nobody in the mainstream addressed it. But we did, the alt media did. That's what counts. Right? Long term, you have to continue to advocate for the changes that are going to be required. You're going to have to start making efforts to, again, eliminate lifetime alimony, to eliminate paternity fraud. You're going to have to keep pushing on all of this stuff. It's going to potentially take years and decades for it to happen, but it will happen. And then the last but not least thing, I think, is you're going to have to start making a discussion about what the new mating dynamic is going to look like. The current marriage model as it exists does not work. What is this new model going to look like? What are the new divisions of responsibility, right? That's also something that I think needs to be discussed. However, that is probably going to be for the long term. Yeah, that is about it. I understand that if you're one of those guys that prefers a straight up fight, that this stuff is not really. It would be nice to just put all the guys on the Manosphere on one side of arena and put all the male feminists on the other side and just have us fight it out. But that's not going to happen. They're too cowardly. They can't win a straight up fight. They have to rely on external institutions and male feminists to do the fighting for them, and the types of individuals that are doing the fighting for them are not particularly, again, lazy, stupid, and soft. Hard, experienced, and hardworking beats lazy, stupid, and soft every single time. In the long run, the truth will out every single time. The commitment that guys in the Manosphere have to the cause will win out over individuals that premise their arguments on a house of cards that doesn't hold up to scrutiny. That's what's going to happen. So I hope you enjoyed this assessment. If you have any other ideas, by all means, let me know. This took a little bit of research and this took a lot of doing, but I mean, I'm free to, unlike feminists, I'm fully able to be accountable here, right? If you think there's something that I left out or something that I missed, and by the way, I mean, there is potentially a religious component to this. Again, though, I religion is not my major area of expertise or knowledge. I do know that imposing some type of structure on yourself yields better results than not imposing structure on yourself. I freely admit that. But, yeah. So here we are. This is the end of this. I hope you get something out of this. And just remember, whether you like it or not, like at some point in the next, it might even happen by the end of 2025. I suspect that it's probably more likely to happen around, you're going to start seeing some real serious waves around this, by the summer of next year, a little over a year from now. But yeah, it is coming. You need to be prepared for it. You need to be able to justify your position. Just understand that the arguments that the Manosphere are putting out are true. And it's not about the personalities. It's about the issues. This is Neroke 5. Like, subscribe, and I will talk to you later. Okay, so I had to do this all over again because I actually got interrupted the first time around. This is The Art of War, and specifically on feminism. So why am I specifically doing this particular recording? Well, I'm doing this particular recording for one purpose and one purpose only. And if you're in the Manosphere, if you're currently involved in the Manosphere, or you're just somebody who's kind of out on the peripheries looking at this, the Manosphere at some point, probably within the next 18 to 36 months, is going to, maybe even before then, maybe even as early as the end of 2025, is going to fall under a really nasty, blistering attack. They're going to have to do it now while they have the resources to do it. I get it that there's going to be some guys out there that are not comfortable with me talking about this. But I mean, yeah, the Manosphere is growing at an absolutely incremental rate. I mean, I'm seeing individuals, again, I've seen the same, especially in particular to MGTOW. It's like MGTOW is that thing that, the thing that nobody dares mention, but everybody knows is there. You know, they talk about men dropping out, but they don't, like, nobody seems to want to say the word MGTOW. Because, and then when I get into the strengths and the weaknesses of feminism, which is what this section is going to be about, yeah, you're going to notice that there's a lot of, yeah, you're going to notice that there's a lot of media control as part of it. But before I get into it, though, I am going to have to say a couple of things about feminism. Women do have more rights and privileges than they had over 100 years ago. That beyond, and feminism and the people that have supported feminism are a huge part of that reason why. Feminism is so indoctrinated into society that there is not a single woman out there that is not, in the West in particular, that has not been tainted by feminism to one degree or another. Yeah, you got to keep in mind here, right? Like the right to vote, that type of thing, right? That's that stuff. Feminists advocated for that stuff. Equal Pay Act, that sort of thing, right? Yeah, women have the same rights and privileges that men do. They claim that they don't, but when on the times that I've asked them to define what right a man has that a woman doesn't, they start getting into obscure things like abortion and whatnot, and it's sort of like, yeah, no. We're not talking about, we're talking about, significant stuff here. Not abortion. But again, they won't acknowledge that. Here's the thing, and this is going to be a very hard pill to swallow for some guys in the Manosphere. But unfortunately, you're going to... this is why I don't think repealing the 19th Amendment is really going to work. Because once these privileges have been given, unless taking privileges or rights away from people, or even doing what they did during COVID, which is basically placing restrictions on people until they comply, is not a good idea. You're going to turn off a lot of people when you start putting restrictions on their actions. That's the reason why I don't think repealing the 19th is going to work. It's the reason why I think taking, or even going back to quote unquote the 50s, going back to using the TradCon model. The TradCon model is not going to work. Sorry, I know that there's a lot of people out there that might argue with me about that one, but yeah, that genie is out of the bottle. we cannot go back. We have to move forward, whether we like it or not. But before I get into this, what I'm going to be doing here, this is called The Art of War Feminism. We are going to have there is going to be a fair, I don't know how long it's going to last. It could just be a few days. It might be a few months. It might be a couple years. But it's going to be a point where the Manosphere is going to be really under some serious attack. We need to be ready for this. But in order to be ready for this, one of the things that you have to do, and this is straight out of Sun Tzu's The Art of War, know your enemy, know yourself. And when I say know your enemy, I am talking about feminism here. I am not talking about women in general. Although, that being said, most feminists are women, that there are male feminists, there's feminist institutions and whatnot, and I will get into that, right? Know your enemy. Know your enemy's strengths, know your enemy's weaknesses. Know your strengths, know your weaknesses. And then with that knowledge, organize and fight appropriately. And to guarantee that you come out on top. And unfortunately for some guys out there who are quote-unquote men of action, the actions that you're going to will have to take are not, it's just not going to be, unless you're dealing with with male feminists, and you will be dealing with a lot of male feminists, but most of this is not going to be a stand-up fight. This isn't going to be two men sitting in a room having a civilized discussion either, in all likelihood. I used to be one of those guys that used to think, well, it's like, if you just explain things to them, they would get it. No, these guys don't want to get it. And I will get into the reasons why they don't want to get it. Right? But again, right, this first section, I am discussing specifically the strengths and the weaknesses of feminism. And in the second part of this, it might even be a second video. The second part of this, I'm going to be discussing the strengths and the weaknesses of the Manosphere. And whether you like it or not, there are some specific issues about the Manosphere. There are some weaknesses and some shortcomings and whatnot that men have to acknowledge. So, without any further ado, though, let's just get into this. Again, right, you have to be aware of the overall cultural impact and the history of your opponent in order to understand them. And you also have to be aware of yourself. And with that, you kind of get the idea of where you're going to go. So without any further ado, let's just get into the strengths of feminism and the weaknesses of feminism. And by the way, there's quite a few of both. In fact, this particular section is much bigger than the one for the Manosphere. All right, number one, and this one was pretty easy to come up with feminism strengths: total system approval, cultural, legal, and political. When I mean cultural, legal, and political, basically feminists, be they male or female, are more or less able to say what they want, when they want, how they want. They have institutional power. They have legal power. They have pretty much got the system down. Right? Like it is a gynos, as to quote Rollo Tomasi here, it is a gynocentric world order. They will deny that that's the case, and they will lie and say that it's still a patriarchy, but that is definitely not. And they will point to the fact that most of the people in power are men, and there's a justifiable reason for that. But it's like, for the most part, they can say what they want, when they want, how they want, lie, misconstrue the facts, rhetoric, propagandize, And with very, very few exceptions, the mainstream media does not run narratives contrary to the gynocentric world order or feminism. They just won't do it. There are occasionally articles that are critical of them, but by and large, they've got full control. And they've got, again, it is starting to fray for the first time, but it's still not there. It's definitely not there. They have full control culturally, legally, politically, and to a great degree, since they spend most of the money, economically as well, they have a significant edge there. So yeah, be aware of that, and that because of number one. Number two, you have to consider that they have the resource advantage. They have larger numbers. I'm not sure how many male feminists they've got, but they do have a resource advantage in terms that there are institutions out there, gender studies departments in universities, laws being passed, the Duluth model being the standard for domestic abuse. Only, I think, maybe 3 domestic abuse shelters in all of North America specifically for men. Like, there is a huge resource dearth. So what that boils down to is that feminists can say what they want, when they want, how they want, and can have as big of a bullhorn as they like, and can put as much money as they want to into these resources, into this propaganda, and the dominant culture will just simply allow it to happen and not allow the opposing voice to have the opposition to have an equal voice. That is just the way it is, right? Because they have an unopposed platform to a great degree, right? That gives them access to more resources. Again, you have, and I will get into this later on, but what you will notice is that, again, right, there are ministries devoted just to women. There are university departments. There are gender studies departments specifically devoted to men's issues. There's entire magazines specifically devoted to women's issues. It's not even really a comparison if you really stop and think about it. Which brings me to strength number 3, a large organization base. Again, right, I was talking about this. Gender studies departments, entire ministries devoted, entire programs, medical funding, prison sentences. I could go on and on and on and on and on. They have a much larger, or they have the National Organization of Women. I could go on and on and on and on. Like, larger groups, better organized, better funded, able to say and do pretty much as they please. That's kind of like a yin and a yang, and I will get into the yang later on. But yeah, that's the current system that they've got. They also have a significant organized. They also have, again, they have more people to get done the things that they need to get done. One of the big ones that came up was Donald Trump's inauguration in 2017 and the large feminist counter-protest that was taking place on the same day. Now, I personally suspect that was supposed to be the crowning achievement point for women everywhere as they go and they celebrated the first female president, whatever, and they changed it over to protest Donald Trump. But that is just that's what I'm talking about, right? Like, they have the ability to organize tens and hundreds of thousands of people showing up at events and getting all the publicity that they need with very little to no opposition, including basically, going into stuff like Wikipedia and YouTube and whatever, censoring Manosphere content. you could see feminists engaged in some of the most hateful rhetoric out there, but very few of them ever get called out on it. Yeah, that is their one singular biggest advantage. Strength number 4, and this one applies to us: male sexual need, white knights, simps, manginas, male feminists, whatnot. Men willing to sacrifice their dignity and willfully staying willfully ignorant. And sometimes just for the case of a pat on the head. I mean, they're not even getting laid at it, but a lot of them are doing it for ulterior motives, for sexual strategy, right? Like, one of the things I think that's probably going to have to be done for the Manosphere side is that we're going to have to start to make men who sacrifice their dignity like this, they're going to have to start to make that unpopular. Men who choose to stay willfully, and they're going to have that. I think that's probably going to have to be one of the approaches that the Manosphere is going to have to take. But yes, there is absolutely no shortage of men willing to do this. And I mean, again, when we start talking about male feminists, we're talking about 3 types, and it's not just the overwhelming majority of them are just guys willing to sacrifice their dignity on the off chance that they're going to get laid or whatever. But you also do have a second group, which are men who, and I will get into this when I get into the strengths and weaknesses of the Manosphere. You do have boys who grew up with men who were fathers who were fucking assholes, or men that abused older brothers and sisters, that made the women folks cry when they were a kid, and the man wants to be the rescue ranger. He wants to compensate because he wasn't able to do it as a boy. Like, you do have that one. And, of course, you also have the worst of the offenders, which are the ones that are trying to compensate for something that bad that they did in previous occasions. Occasionally, you'll get an absolute believer. In the now going on almost dozen years that I have been active in the Manosphere, I have encountered one individual online who is like that. These are guys that are extremely rare, and for all I know, that guy might have been lying to me. Yeah. And you, like I said, you certainly have and you also have guys attempting to hijack, I'm going to call them the blue pill Manosphere people. And I'm going to have to actually do a whole video on them, on how to spot the blue pill Manosphere. These are individuals that will acknowledge the problem. Trad cons are really bad for this, by the way. They will acknowledge the problem, and then they will proceed to still make it our fault. And yeah, when I get into the Manosphere part on this, that part will get covered. But again, right, a lot of men willing to sacrifice their dignity in order for this to happen. Number 5, the victim card. This is the one that, when I was saying earlier about how men are going to be kind of frustrated. Some men are going to be frustrated because they can't just go out and engage in a straight up confrontation. And again, the whole time I have been in the Manosphere, I have only seen one MRA versus feminist confrontation debate in my entire life. By the way, the feminist literally got destroyed in this debate. I'm trying to remember who the hell it was, but she just went up and spewed rhetoric, whereas opposed to the man addressed the points. And yeah, I believe it was 2015. I wish I could remember who the hell it was. Jessica Valente. Yeah, that's it. She got absolutely wrecked. That's the only time I have seen it happen. I have seen femras or female MRAs go up against feminists. I've seen that a few times, but I've never seen a guy from the Manosphere actively go up against a feminist. At least not until recently, not until you started getting Fresh and Fit and you started getting whatever. And look at what's happening there, by the way, right? Like, you get the occasional woman on there who, like there was one on Fresh and Fit, who went in and specifically grandstanded and went in specifically to grandstand. And even then, she didn't do a particularly good job, right? But by and large, you're seeing feminists, especially on whatever and Fresh and Fit, like they're just getting blown out of the water. Again, right? Because the rhetoric doesn't hold up. But I will get into that later. But yes, if you want to, and here's what I'm talking about though, right? And they are literally attempting to do this. They're trying to get Fresh and Fit and whatever off the air because they're taking advantage of these poor women. They're making them look stupid. They're picking women that aren't particularly smart. They're picking women that are vulnerable. They're picking that. They're making a bunch of excuses. They're trying to play the victim card on this, right? That's the issue, right? Fresh and Fit and whatever are incredibly effective at disrupting feminist arguments. And as a result, women, feminists, are trying to play the victim card and saying that these poor girls are being victimized by the guys by Andrew Wilson or the guys on Fresh and Fit. And they're basically, they try to play the victim card. But by and large, though, right, when you take on women, even if you're right, and I've seen this happen by women after the fact, after they've been on Fresh and Fit or whatever, and I've seen them getting destroyed. But yeah, the victim card is one that you see quite frequently. Big primary example of that is the reaction of women that get blown out of the water, probably more so on whatever than on Fresh and Fit, but yeah, right? They're making their arguments look bad, and the rhetoric really falls apart, and it really shows. And of course, right, rather than admit, hey, maybe our arguments are bullshit, they try to play the victim, right? That's the issue here. Yeah, even if you take the woman on, even if you win, you still end up losing because you end up she plays the victim card, and not enough people are smart enough to see through that, unless you happen to be an active member of the Manosphere. And this gets into issue number 6 and 7. Number 6 is that there are still cultures out there that view women as second-class citizens. This throwing acid in the face, honor killings, that type of thing, that stuff is still out there. I have seen feminists attempt to use those issues and try to subtly project that somehow is magically happening in the West. It's not, unless, of course, it's like in a very enclosed community or whatever, but it's generally not happening in the West, although you will see women specifically feminists attempting to project this out as actually happening in the West. And it's not. However, it does exist, and because it does exist, you, again, going back to 1 and 2 and 3 here, they can basically just say it, and again, there's little to no opposition going the other way to prevent them from saying it, right? To call them out. And number 7, hold on a second. Yeah, no, sorry, that goes down to feminism weaknesses. Well, actually, I think I'm going number 7. This generalized female group think, which is something that women are particularly, again, this has a strength and a weakness. The strength is that, a group of women together is it. You're not just dealing, when you fight with a woman, you're not just dealing with one woman. You end up having to deal with multiple women, and then you end up having to deal with their fucking boyfriends or whatever, right? It's like, there's a group mindset. That group mindset it can create a mob at the same time, right? There's a yin and a yang to it, right? But there is strength in numbers. Now, let's get into feminism's weaknesses. And by the way, there are a substantial number of these. And a lot of these are the yang to the yin of feminist strengths. And I will get, and some of these might actually be surprising to you. And some of these were like, well, duh. But they still have to be included. All right, and I start with number one, lack of any real physical power. The average woman is just not as strong as the average man. So a woman does not have as much of an ability to control the environment that is around her by physical force. She has to rely on manipulation. She has to rely on the guy to get out and move stuff for her, to carry things, that type of thing, right? Sometimes they got to get the guy to open the jar for them, right? That's just a fact. They're just not physically. That is part of the reason why certain labor jobs are only done by men, right? That's that would fall under number one. Number two, and this one is really interesting. You take 100 guys from the Manosphere, and you take 100 male feminists, and you put them in a parking lot, or you put them in a stadium, and you have them fight to the death. 99% probability that it's going to be the guys from the Manosphere that are going to win out. The caliber of the male support, and I talked about this earlier. The creepy white knight, the guy who's completely willing to sell out his dignity, that type of thing, right? The guy who's not only is ignorant but wants to stay ignorant. That's the caliber of a lot of male feminists. And this is going to be a problem with them, because when women they're going to try to get the state and other men to try to come in and white knight and try to intimidate guys in the Manosphere into backing off. And it's like, again, it's a catch-22 for them, right? Because most of these male, and I know, because I deal with them online on a regular basis. They're just simply spouting feminist rhetoric, and most of them fall apart. Most of them don't have, and with very rare exceptions, most of them don't have the stomach to engage in the type of long-term battling that guys in the Manosphere are willing to do. It's more about status and the average male feminist is soft, weak, and unreliable. And while there are some exceptions to that rule, those exceptions are very rare. And it's, these are the type, they're gonna have the state, and they're gonna have this group, and this group is not going to last. It's gonna be ugly for a few weeks or a few months when they come in, but it's not gonna last very long, because most of these guys don't have the fortitude. Most of these guys don't have the dedication. Most of these guys, they're soft, they're weak. Because they're soft and weak, they'll just get mowed down when it comes to when the time comes for this to happen. Topic number 3, female nature isn't conducive to conflict. No, it's not. Going back into, women complaining about the fact that men have when women start talking about prestige jobs, right? Or lack of representation, this complaint will only apply to jobs where there's power, where there's money, or there's prestige. You never hear women complaining about the lack of sewage cleaners. You'll never hear the lack of women talking about lack of women laborers. You'll never hear them bitching about that. The only time that this comes up is when it's one of these 3. That's because it's all about status and appearances to them, and it's not necessarily about the actual responsibility, the willingness to get dirty, to get things done. The other part on this is that, despite, and again, right, there's some going back to strengths here, there's been attempts by feminists to create this impression that women were the hunters and women were the warriors and whatever. But I mean, there has never been a situation where they maybe found the occasional female warrior, but they've tried to twist things around to make it look like there were a lot of women warriors. But I mean, there just isn't a lot of archaeological evidence of women being the hunters. There's not a lot of archaeological evidence of women dying in massive numbers in defense of a society. There's just not any of that around. It's just not there. Hate to break it to you ladies, but that's true. It's not there. Deal with it. Like their nature is not conducive to doing that. There's that if they're not willing. And this is, again, right, when you get into male nature, males are willing to get dirty. Males are willing to get ugly. Males are willing to get down there in the dirt to get the job done, whereas women are not. And, of course, the actual caliber of the male feminist is, like, most of them are not willing to do that, by and large. Number 4, and this one is really interesting, but I think it's probably one that I think needs to be brought up, because this also applies to the Manosphere, but in a different way. The way female competitiveness works is that they're always trying to one-up each other within the crowd. That more so than with men. That means that the infighting with women is a lot more vicious than it is with men, right? And that internal competitiveness within female groups does not, it causes, the infighting actually holds them back, right? You can they have a hard time deciding who the leader is going to be because personalities, as opposed to just appointing somebody and making them a leader and then trusting that leader like it is with men by and large, right? It makes things very, very difficult. It makes it very hard to get things done when you have a group of women around. The competitiveness and the infighting really makes it hard for women to engage in coordinated actions. Number 5, the total system support is left them fat, lazy, and arrogant. You need only go to Wikipedia for this, but you can also see this on YouTube. You can see this on Quora. You can see this on a lot of Silicon Valley sites. You can see this in TV. You can see this in the movies, right? Get woke, go broke specifically applies to the feminist cultural Marxist propaganda that is coming out of Hollywood. There's a movie coming out and there's a TV series coming out right now called Ironheart that Marvel Pictures finally had to release, even though they knew it was going to tank, because it was just another piece. It looks like it's going to be another piece of girl power trap. They just cannot just tell a story, right? The system has made them fat, lazy, and arrogant. I'm currently dealing with a feminist right now. Nothing but rhetoric. The moment I switch it around and try to force her to actually address the point. And by the way, the series of memes she posted up was in no way, like, she was too lazy to even do, and this is a big issue I'm noticing with a lot of the attacks coming against the Manosphere. Like, they're completely off base. They're easy to debunk because it becomes it's like, for instance, I did one on Mooncat, and I also did one with Anya at one point, right? And it became, and while both of them, and this is the issue, right, about status and whatever. On the surface, they both of those series, and I had to do a 5-parter on Mooncat. Good God, what a horrible goddamn series that was. What a horrible hour and a half she made. But I mean, it was very, very obvious that they hadn't done a lick of research into what it was that they were doing, right? Their sources were other feminist sources. None of them bothered to check. I mean, Mooncat was literally so lazy in her fact-checking that she tried to play the white supremacy angle after using Donovan Sharp, Fresh and Fit, and Kevin Samuels as examples of the Manosphere multiple times throughout her hour and a half garbage fest. She tried to play the white supremacy angle after using all, and it's so unironic that she didn't see it, right? Yeah. They just say it and hope that nobody fact checks. And the reason why they do that is because the mainstream media doesn't fact check them. The mainstream media doesn't hold them accountable. And that lack of accountability is, again, I will get into that at a later point, but that lack of accountability means that when they stick their foot in your mouth, and they do it all the time, nobody calls them out on it, except for guys in the Manosphere, of course. And again, every time they do that, Miss Bates, for instance, also is another one who just says stuff about the Manosphere and never addresses her critics, right? Fat, lazy, arrogant, and they have a significant infrastructure, cultural, and legal advantage. And yeah, they're just pissing it all away. I have no problem saying that, right? Because it's like, even on the off chance that there is a feminist that is listening to this, go ahead. Try to convince them that they're not doing their jobs, right? They'll just tell her to F off, right? Because of the way women work within the structure. So it's like, yeah, good luck with that. Yeah, and then that gets me to number 6, the lack of substance behind the rhetoric. Oh, yes. Yes, the lack of substance behind the rhetoric has, again, forced them to rely, again, right, going back to the fat, lazy, and arrogant. They never address their critics. They rely on YouTube and Google and the state to pass hate speech laws and whatnot to censor their opponents rather than address the facts, right? They have to rely not just on male feminists, but they have to rely on external support to get things done, right? And that is a big weakness, any woman that is smart enough to actually figure this out and try to reorganize. I mean, it's possible that you might get an Alexander the Great for feminism at some point that is able to organize this in there. I have seen occasionally women who come up with good strategies, but by and large, right, even those strategies are simply based around ad hominem and that type of thing. You know, all of their rhetoric, even some of the stuff that I saw, for instance, I'm going to bring up Mooncat and Anya again, because I've done videos on those two particular people. Again, there is, like, you know, they relied, Mooncat did not address, she did eventually get around to addressing Pearly things, right? Again, because that's woman on woman, right? But, I mean, she never addressed any of the people who did videos that were critical of her content. She didn't address one of them. At no point did Mooncat ever address any of her critics. And her stuff has been quoted a number of times. Again, with a lot of this stuff, it looks good. It sounds good. It looks like they did their research until you start to push, right? They have to, and when you start to push, instead of addressing the concerns, which of course they can't do because a lot of it is just rhetoric and propaganda and lies or misrepresentations, they have to rely on third parties to do the censoring for them because they can't make their points stand up in a straight up fight. And this gets me to number 7. This is the thing. It's like, I mean, I can post this up, and you will be seeing this getting posted up, by the way. A feminist could listen to all of this and could try to make these points to a group of women, and you would not, they cannot because they're stuck in a group mindset. And they're so subjected to, and this is probably why I left 9 out at the end. They're so subject to a group mindset for an individual woman to take charge and push this through. Would have a hard time organizing on a large level to do it. I mean, she might get a bunch of men to be able to do it for her, but I mean, to organize a whole group of women to do something like this, I mean, other than engage in a massive form of rhetoric and propaganda, which is what you got during the Trump inauguration. So they are capable of it, but only in very limited circumstances, right? There's not a unified leadership, there's not a unified opinion, and there's not a unified direction. And because you have none of those things, they have to rely on external support to do it because they can't organize within themselves long enough to fight back. And number 8, and this is the one, again, like I was going to go number 9, group mindset, but again, right, number 7 is probably covers that. It's just a complete, it would require a woman to step out from the crowd, and women just don't step out from the crowd. Most women are very susceptible to groupthink. You'll occasionally meet one that isn't, but that's exceedingly rare. And number 8, the complete inability to acknowledge, deal, or control rampant misandry in the ranks. Again, right, I have yet to see a single feminist call this stuff out. Oh, wait. Speaking of number 7, and this is something that I'm going to have to point out. This is, if you want a prime example of the complete lack of leadership within feminism, let's talk about trans men taking away athletic opportunities from women. Now, this is the ultimate expression of misogyny. In fact, I just saw a video yesterday morning where David Menzies was confronting this man who's playing on a women's rugby team, and the women on that team defended him. Clearly, somebody else called David Menzies up And this guy, and they actually tried to take him to court over it, and obviously it didn't work. But again, right, when you get to this one, again, right, a complete ability to acknowledge and deal with rampant misandry and set the rank. Yeah, again, I have yet to see a feminist. I've seen women speak out against this, but I have not seen a group of a single solitary feminist or group of feminists openly question or challenge the rampant misandry that exists within most feminist organizations. And that toxic misandric conduct has, to one degree or another, infected almost every woman in the West, for the most part. Which gets me into one last point about lack of leadership on this. Again, right, in order for a woman inside the feminist ranks to actually go, yeah, hey, look, maybe we should stop and not be so man-hating, that would require a woman or a group of women to step out from the crowd. And to do that for women, I'd just say that's almost like a death sentence. So yeah, going through this, these are the advantages, these are the strengths and weaknesses of feminism. I hope you found this particularly informative. Yeah, a couple of the other things I'm going to point out about this. Yeah, like knowing all of this stuff. Yeah, you kind of understand what it is you're dealing with here. You're dealing with an individual that will lie, misrepresent, twist facts around, not engage in honest conversation. And if you do try to engage the person in honest conversation, they will just simply wimp out, or they will try to play the victim or whatever, but they will do anything other than address the point, because it's sort of like, yeah, it's a house of cards based upon lies. And the problem with lying is that you have to lie, and then you have to lie, and you have to make another lie to cover up the lie, and you have to da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And it's like it just gets harder and harder and harder and harder and harder to maintain the lie. They're already having to rely on external props in order to keep this afloat. The problem is that if a couple of key pillars of these lies start to fall apart, the whole thing falls apart. And they have to keep using duct tape and glue to keep this thing together. And as the manosphere gets larger and larger, it becomes less and less effective. Because when I get into the last section of this, because you have to actually deal with the problem. You know, you actually have to be able to self-reflect and be honest about where you're at and what you're doing. And then, because we're talking about women here, then you have to convince other women to be like that when taking personal accountability is not something that, in fact, it's culturally encouraged for women to not take, especially Western women, to not take accountability for their own actions. So yeah, stick around for part 2, but this is the end of part 1. The strengths and weaknesses of feminism in regards to the gender war. Yeah, stick around. I will be getting into the strengths and weaknesses of the Manosphere here just shortly. Yeah, you thought it was over, didn't you? Well, no, it's not over. I had to listen through, and I had a chance to digest the information, and I realized that I left out one very important, very critical part in the Manosphere, and this one falls under weaknesses. And, of course, that weakness also meant that I had to come up with another strategy, which, by the way, I had in my mind. I don't know when I was writing all this stuff down that this particular one skipped me. But yeah, another one of the fundamental weaknesses about the Manosphere is that it is divided into groups that don't necessarily get along with each other. For instance, MGTOW and PUA have very, very differing strategies when it comes to dealing with the gender, with the woman question, with male-female relationships. MGTOWs take their toys and go home. Sometimes they whine about women, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they talk about if women would be this or this or this or this. And it's not really like, you know, women are women, period, right? Like, you know, the part about acceptance around this is that, yeah, you're just going to have to accept the way they are. PUAs, though, have a much differing strategy. They try to play within the rules. They try to manipulate the rules. They try to improve their lives, and they improve their lives unlike MGTOWs who just simply chase goals, not girls. PUAs try to pursue both. And the issue here is that the MGTOWs don't like the PUAs because in the eyes of a MGTOW, and yeah, I'm going to have to be straight up honest here with some of the PUA / red pill men that listen to my stuff. All right, like a lot of MGTOW hold PUAs in contempt because there's like almost a level of willful fucking ignorance about the situation, right? A toying with the odds, for lack of a better word, right? Yeah, from a statistical point of view, there's maybe only about a 1 to 5% chance you're going to run into that one real toxic fucking woman that's going to turn your life upside down. The only problem is, though, and I mean, I actually pointed this out. Like, I mean, if the planes crash at the same rate that guys get shafted over in toxic relationships, there'd be like multiple crashes. Like nobody would fucking fly a commercial airliner. That's how bad it is. You know, like the crime rate would be so bad that we would be living in fortified neighborhoods and it would be anarchy and chaos because you really wouldn't know who to trust. But these guys, and this is from the MGTOW perspective, these guys seem quite willing to take that chance. And for most of them, yeah, it probably does work out. Not so fucking fun, though, if you end up being in that group. and almost every single guy in the Manosphere knows at least one, probably more guys that this has happened to, and what's happened to them financially, emotionally, spiritually, and whatever. Now, PUAs dislike MGTOWs because they think MGTOWs are just quitting, that MGTOWs are cowards, and they claim to be red pill. I mean, if you're red pill, you have to acknowledge the gender situation as it is, right? I'm speaking as a MGTOW here. I'm speaking from the MGTOW faction. PUAs just think that MGTOWs are cowards and they're quitters and they just gave up, or they're just ugly guys that can't get girlfriends or whatever, right? And like there's a mutual dislike between the two. And of course the MRAs kind of distance themselves from those groups. And then of course each MGTOW has got some subsets in it and whatever, right? Like the black pill is a subset group of MGTOW, for instance. The whole issue here is that just like with feminism, there are differentiating factions inside the Manosphere. And because of there are those differentiating factions inside the Manosphere, much like with male sexual need, like not every guy is going to agree on the best approach. And what needs to be done around this is and I talked about this to a certain extent, but I'm going to have to expand upon it. Expanding male spaces is also going to expand in a way which prevents like agent provocateurs and individuals out with just axes to grind, or hustlers and grifters who will happily take advantage of certain situations to foment bad feelings between the various factions in the Manosphere. One of the things I think that needs to be done is that there definitely needs to be some type of developing of some unofficial line of communication between the major players in each of these factions. Because, the best way, and I have thought about this, and I don't know why I didn't push this yesterday. The best way, I think, to potentially defeat the Manosphere is going to be to send in agent provocateurs to create conflict between the varying factions, divide us against each other. Therefore, if they're going to try and do this, it's going to be necessary for us to form lines of communication between the factions. PUA needs to be talking to MGTOW. MGTOW needs to be talking to MRA. MRA needs to be talking to PUA. And they all need to be kind of the figureheads need to be speaking to each other. They don't have to be one big happy. So I don't think it's ever going to be one big happy. But, there absolutely needs to be degrees of communication. Like, for instance, one of the things that happened is that there was a guy, and we're talking about, I think it was 20... not specifically, but is the guy who runs the Come On Man podcast, and he posted up a video about MGTOW because nobody likes a quitter. And it's like, it was a very provocative name, and he, of course, right, the MGTOWs in the community, myself included, absolutely, I specifically went right at him, front on. Now, unfortunately for me, I happened to be working the day he did that podcast, right? But I said what I needed to say to him. I don't fucking like bullies, and you're trying to fucking bully people and fucking holding different opinion than you. And that's not going to work, right? You need to put your ego, you have to commitment before ego, which is something out of Sterling. By the way, Sterling is not that big on MRA or MGTOW or PUA either, by the way. And I include Sterling, the Sterling Institute of Relationship in this because I'm easily going to say that probably like the number 4 after MGTOW and PUA and MRA. I'm going to say Sterling is number 4 in that category, and Sterling seems to fulfill a very specific niche. But there needs to be, and the Promise Keepers as well, there's not a lot of communication between these people, but I mean, there needs to be a space or a form of communication between these people to avoid infighting. Because if there's a way to defeat the Manosphere, that is specifically it. And I mean, one of the easy ways to do it, because it is particularly easy, for instance, for somebody to just claim that they're a MGTOW, right? You see, unlike PUA or MRA, where you have to have a lot of legitimate street cred before you become recognized, to a great extent with MGTOW, all you got to do is just assume the label, and you can just start talking. And I have seen individuals claim that they used to be MGTOW and ... And it's like it was very, very clear after listening to them that they weren't MGTOW. Right? I don't see, what it really comes down to is that the red pill, once taken, cannot be untaken. And if somebody's claimed that they used to be red pill or they used to be MGTOW, it's like, it's like you can't really make that claim because it's like you can't unknow what you know. So, I would have to incorporate that into the strategy. And the factionalism within the Manosphere has to be written in there as a weakness. So, now I'm done. If you have anything else you think might be worthy of consideration, and I'm not just talking about some snarky prick coming in here and posting up some troll bullshit, saying stuff because they think it's going to somehow magically own the Manosphere, like as if that's actually in any way even humanly possible. But if you got something really constructive, feel free to respond. I freely admit, and I mean, I'm doing this as an addendum, which literally proves that I do not know everything. I definitely cannot remember everything. So the Rookie 5, like me on, at this point I'm just at Patreon. Like me at Patreon and subscribe. I've got 5 different video platforms that I post up on, and I will talk to you all later. Have a good one. Bye.